So today we're going to talk about how to train agents that every commercial real estate brokerage wants. And for that, I've got George Pino. He's the CEO of Commercial Brokers International here in Los Angeles, my business partner. George does all the training for all our company, Commercial Brokers International, every morning at 8:30 a.m. and then again it closes out at 5 p.m. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we do and a little bit about what George has done to get to what he's doing with these classes. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
So now, you started doing training how many years ago?
Oh, goodness gracious. A decade plus.
Yeah.
Probably about 20 years ago when we really started the company, we saw that there was really a need, not just for new education, but continuing education, especially with a lot of the new, constantly changing laws and things like that. So we always had an education program. We probably didn't formalize it, though, till about 15 or so years ago.
Yeah, well, I'm going to dive into this. Now, first thing, that I want to touch on is the title of this video, How to Train Agents That Every Commercial Real Estate Brokerage Wants. And it sounds like, we're training them for them to go on to another company, right? Well, if you do the training properly, other companies are going to come in and recruit them.
Absolutely.
So it's your job as a team leader or the broker of the company to make sure you not only train them, but then maintain that relationship with them. So now, training quality. Let's dive into that right off. What's the first thing that you really look at?
When you're looking at the quality itself and how you're looking at measuring it, there's a combination of things. It should, first of all, training shouldn't just be focused on one aspect.
Right.
It needs to have a core setting, so to speak, where you're delving into and it should be done in a streamlined way where, maybe start off with the basic real estate or commercial real estate stuff. But then you also have to really build into a combination of sales techniques as well, teaching them how to sell. But more importantly, I think that one of the things that it has to go into is the critical thinking. That's the aspect that's missing when it comes to commercial real estate, and that's where mentors and where senior people can really add value is that critical thinking, meaning if this happens, how does it affect this on the transaction? What's going to happen? What's going to go? How can I then mitigate that risk from it happening? And I think that is one of the key things that it has to be included in your training is not just the legal side, meaning the paperwork and all that, not just the general economics of the transactions, or like how to read it, how to understand it, how to really analyze the property, not just the sales, but also how to truly critically think to be able to add value for both the agent as well as their clients.
Right. How do you measure the effectiveness of your training programs?
That's actually a great question because, that's one of the hardest things to measure is going to be the effectiveness. How are you going to go about really making sure that the training is working, so to speak? And what we do is we track everything. We have analytics, and also, there's an old saying that, you can judge the people by the company they keep. And carrying that a step further, I can tell you, and going back to what you're saying, that our agents, they are on a faster track. So we're tracking stuff. I have agents that are literally in the business for 3 months and on multiple deals that they've generated themselves using our strategies and tactics and our training courses. So, this is literally unheard of within the industry to have multiple agents that are newer to do this quickly. And we've seen it over and over. More importantly, going back to the company you keep and what you said earlier, our agents get recruited. There's a reason our agents get recruited. Our agents get recruited because the companies out there know that we're training them and know that they have a very good understanding of the business side of it. And we're not just training on all the aspects of just the general real estate, so to speak, but also how they manage their business. And that, if anything, is going to help any other company go out to them, so they're going to recruit them. So we train and track everything there, seeing how quickly deals are done, what kind of numbers, what kind of conversion rates. Our conversion rates, there's an old saying that the rule of 10, 10 calls to get one good conversation, 10 good conversations to get one good meeting, 10 meetings to get one good listing. Well, we track those numbers. Ours are much less than that, closer to that, about 50% of that. And the reason why we're successful with that, I believe, is because the training, the education that goes into it. We're not, there's the easy pitch of, ask the three questions. Are you interested in selling? Are you interested in buying? Do you know anybody who is? And then move on. That's not our approach. Our approach is to add value because that creates business and it creates longevity in the industry. It will create repeat business down the road as well. Not just chasing the deal, but chasing the business, so to speak. And that's what we train our agents for. It's a different mindset also. So that is what we have to train for to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're putting across the same message.
I think the thing that you do at 5 o'clock, which I'll let you explain, that is probably a big reason that you're really able to figure out the effectiveness, because when they tell you what they've done each day,
Yep.
there's a lot of power in that. So why don't you break that down?
Absolutely. So, our training schedule itself, we do 5 days a week in the morning. We have the basic classes as far as everything from real estate going on to the sales pitches to critical thinking to everything that we just talked about. Now, at 5 o'clock, I think this is the most important aspect of our training. At 5 o'clock, for some of the newer agents and also some of the medium-sized and even some of the senior agents will come in and sit down with us every now and then, and we go over how the day was. Okay, and what I mean by that is we're sitting down going over the calls, the call volume, the call responses, trying to fine tune how to, like if maybe they're getting the agent's getting a similar response over and over again, and it's a negative one. So we're going to sit down and see what they're saying to try and fine tune that pitch during that 5 o'clock meeting. In addition to that, we're sitting down going, well, have you done every other aspect of our training aspect? Are you looking back? Are you doing your marketing? Are you putting out marketing pieces? Did you do an email? Have you worked on this? Your social posts. How many people did you contact on your sphere of influence as well, not just cold calling? So we break all that up because, the old saying, what isn't tracked isn't managed. So we have to track all that, but at the 5 o'clock, it gives everybody a chance to sit down and reflect for the day. How was that day good? And normally we start that 5 o'clock meeting is, I'll sit there and what we talk about with the agents is, how'd your day good? Could you have done it better? Wanting them to think about what could they have done better for that day, and then coming back and let's try and incorporate. Sometimes they're a little too hard on themselves.
Sure.
You have to step in and go, you know what?
Yeah.
That's a little too much for you. You might want to back off a little bit and doing all that because you're going to burn out. But that's also where the manager and the trainer comes in, is that evaluating and understanding time frames and how long it's going to take. So it's all encompassing on the training, not just here's what's out there, go out and get it and go out and do it, but also how long is it supposed to take? How long is it taking you? How can we refine it? How can we make it more efficient?
Yeah.
All that.
I think it also, what I see when you do those is it kind of builds between all these new people a bit of a community, because they all sit there and talk about their experiences to each other. When somebody has a struggle, the other person will pitch in their idea and say, listen,
Exactly.
This is what worked for me. So I think it not only, it builds community within your company. So I think it's also a strong point.
Well, not just creating the community in their company, but everyone also has those efficiencies because, ultimately, one person can only make a certain amount of calls a day.
Right.
And with that in mind, they're only going to talk to a certain amount of people. So they may not get as many objections as, or I guarantee they're not getting as many objections or the different types of objections as everybody making those calls. So at 5 o'clock, when we sit down and we start talking about that, it actually gives them insight into what they might expect from another call and how to overcome that so they don't lose that opportunity when they do make that call and they get that response back. So there's a lot of synergies involved as well, and it does create that community because everyone feels they're helping one another out.
Yeah, and if you go into the room where they're all calling, you hear them talking to each other about it. So
Oh, yeah.
I really think it's not just about the education, it's about building community within your company. How do you foster a culture of continuous learning and improvement? What do you do?
When you're looking at continuous learning and improvement, a lot of that has to do with a perception and mindset of the agent itself. And you have to sit there and understand and explain to them sometimes that, this is an evolving landscape. How we did business 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago is different than how we do business today. It's constantly evolving, so there's continual training, there's ongoing training. When it goes to the ongoing itself, a lot of that is we can work with the agent. Sometimes we'll have a senior agent come in and teach a class. It's a great way for them to come in and actually reinforce the ideas and concepts. And you'd be surprised how many times a senior agent, when they're sitting in there and they're getting a class, like, oh, you know what? I haven't been doing that. I need to start doing that again. And they forget, but it's that mindset. It's just that reinforcement over and over about what should be done and what are the best practices to be done for not just the real estate, but also for their business.
The getting these new agents to show up, how do you incentivize them to show up every morning at 8:30 and then again at 5 o'clock? Because that in the beginning that's tough, right? So what incentives do you push?
The biggest incentive, to be honest with you, it should be from the agent.
Yeah.
They
want it.
And they need to want it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is probably the number one indicator of whether an agent's going to be successful or not. If I have to constantly motivate someone to be here and for the classes and the education, which is going to improve their business, then they're just not that interested in their business. So I have to then, as a trainer and a partner in a company, I have to make the decision of whether or not is my time worth the effort going in if they're just never going to go, if they don't want it. Because, ultimately, if someone doesn't want it, you can't force feed. You can't force feed them the education or how to look or how to think. They have to take that step themselves. The old saying that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, it's very true with the agents itself. That being said, we also have some fun. So we'll break it down. And this is part of, just enjoying it. Sales agents in general are typically type A personalities, right? They like to compete. They like to go after things. So we have fun competitions. They could be something as silly as, let's, to break up the day, it could be something as silly as let's make an paper airplane and see how far it can fly. But also we do competitions for sales, and we do it so that everybody can potentially be involved and win, from young agents to senior agents. So we're looking at different ways that we can motivate them to come in so that they want to learn to be able to do it. And it could be something as simple as, whoever gets the most likes on their social media posts for the week, or follows, or things like that, because that reinforces their marketing and comes in, and that allows everybody to actually be involved and to be able to work, not just the senior agents, not just the junior agents. It's across the board, leveling the playing field. We'll also have competitions for the most number of appointments, things like that. So a lot of this is the competition is geared toward motivating them to come in for the classes so they can expedite their training and their process to understand how they can do business.
When talking to a few of the agents, most of them just want to get making money. And so they know that if they're at these classes and they're learning, they're going to make money faster.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
I really think that's a plus. Now, your program is pretty structured. How did you come up with a structure for your classes? I know you have a syllabus and everything.
Started off with just basic classes. What would I want to know as a real estate agent? From there, we started going into different things, and we started structuring it in a way so that we may start off with something as simple as let's go over all the commercial terminology, because a lot of times it's extremely important in not just how you say but what you say. And vice versa. It's not just important what you say but how you say it as well. And so we look at that, we start there, and then we start delving into different concepts, different ideas. And the idea is that if an agent wants to start making money the fastest, typically speaking, leasing is the fastest way. Also,
Retail leasing.
Retail leasing right now,
Yeah.
and that's the hottest market. But
Right.
in general, leasing itself,
Right.
like when the office markets were hot a few years ago, that was one of the fastest ways to start earning money. But depending on where and leasing itself is the core foundation of investment sales. So we start off there. we start off talking about the leasing, teaching everybody about the leasing, even if they want to go into sales. Because if they don't understand the leasing and how the leases can affect the value of the property and how to look at it, then they are going to have a difficult time doing investment sales, because all their clients already know this. So we start looking at the leasing, we start going into the paperwork, we start going into the transactions, we start going into different securitization structures, what to expect from different types of tenants. You know, if you're working with mom and pops versus corporate versus international, how to go about it. What are all the issues that that may come up. From there, we then start going into maybe delving into analytics of the properties itself so that they can understand how to create value for the properties, and then that then goes into the sales. In addition to that, typical coursework, we mix in sales techniques, and the sales techniques can be everything from different pitches to, you know, even speaking about tone, tonality, pacing, reading, you know, going into reading body language, listening for cues, trying to improve and fine tune their performance. Also working with them in a group setting. You know, if you're giving a group presentation, which is extremely common these days, there's certain things that each person should be doing. So we're teaching all of that, how to do that to try and ensure a better return, or in this case, a higher likelihood that we're going to be able to sign that listing or sign that client up.
Right. So you're training sales, leasing, the whole gamut, correct? In this curriculum.
Absolutely, absolutely. Everything that you could think of that might, you know, even economics.
How long are those agents in those classes?
You know,
18 months?
it varies. Typically 6 to 12.
Okay.
You know, because we're doing
That's a lot faster than I was expecting.
We're doing it 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And, you know, if this was once a week, yeah, it's 18 months to 2 years at least.
Right. And this is all in person.
This
You don't allow,
I don't allow anything on Zoom.
call-ins if they are out on an...
Every now and then we'll allow call-ins to come in, but frankly, you know, it's something we learned during the pandemic. We can, you know, the agents asked for the training classes, and they wanted it to do that. It was probably more of a social thing during the pandemic.
Sure.
It was more about an opportunity that they could all get together on a video call and talk to one another for an hour and a half, or at least be involved in something with one another for an hour and a half. But what we found is
I
that
remember everybody with their hair just growing and growing and growing.
and beards starting up
beard.
with sometimes in some of them.
Yeah.
But one of the things though is that, you know, we found that about 80 to 90% of the material that we covered was not absorbed.
Right.
And we'd have to go over it again and remind them, like, you know, we've discussed this, we've done this. So it's very difficult to have that interaction and to have that, you know, because a lot of times we'll start off the classes just asking questions. And, you know, part of it is I want to see where they're at in their knowledge or thinking, but also part of it is looking at their critical thinking, because some of the questions may be a little bit tricky, but they're going to be the same type of questions that are posed by clients.
Yeah.
And so we want to see how their reaction is so that we can then fine tune that as well. So we get them more involved, and you can't really do that via Zoom.
Right. You still get the feel. So we're talking
call.
mostly about new agents. Let's go into ongoing education for the more experienced agents. What do you do for the more experienced agents? How do you keep them with the training?
Well, you know, we number one, for some of the agents that may not be in the office or out of the office, we go over things every 2 weeks on as far as new laws coming out and things like that in our office meetings.
Right.
We discuss that. We talk about what to be aware of, what to do. In addition to that, if something does come about that is relatively new, we send out or of interest rather, whether it's a new type of sales technique, new type of way to look at it, whatever it may be. We go out and we will send that out to every one of the agents for them to take a look at and review and understand what's going on. Additionally, you have continuing education requirements, of course, any Department of Real Estate, that any state that's in, but also we look at continuing education. We try and promote the continuing education with going with different groups, whether it's an SIOR or CCIM or working over, whatever designation or professional that you want to go into. That being said, there's also a lot of outside classes. So a lot of the agents take those outside classes. When they come in though, and we talked about this before, is we always ask those agents to try and give a class on what they just learned and have them involved so that the newer agents can also learn from that. But again, it reinforces what they just learned or have learned to really come back into that. So we'll sit down and a lot of times we'll just, ask an agent, senior agent to come in and say, hey, you know what, that's a great idea. Do you mind talking about that in a class next week? And get them involved with that aspect so that they're not just hearing it from one person, but they're hearing it from multiple people, the younger agents. But it's the reinforcement, I think, if anything, because there's many times when I'm even doing the class and I'm like, oh, you know what? I better start doing that because I can't be the one that's do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
So I got to follow up with it and do it too, because there are certain things you get stuck in your patterns, and every now and then, as senior agents, and you know how you do your business, and a lot of times you may cut corners.
Right.
And so it's really good to actually have these classes to be able to sit back and go, oops, you know what, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Let's go back to this.
Well, I also think as a more senior broker, and you've got a junior or two, because I know, I see it in our office, you have a very open door communication policy. The experienced agents will come in and shut the door because they don't want anybody else in the office to know that they're asking a question about something they've either forgotten or just need to brush up on. So that's always been impressive with everything that's happening here. But then secondly is I heard one of our agents recently ask you to, listen, I need a brush up. And she's been in the business for 3-4 years now. I need a brush up on that. Can we do a class on that? I'd like to come in and be part of the class.
Yeah.
And it's because one of her juniors is also struggling with that a little bit. So the request by the senior agent to really, or more senior agent, to have the class. I think that also gives this more senior agents a little bit of ownership in the company. And so I think that works very, very well.
Absolutely, no, it absolutely does, and we sit there and it's very much a collaborative environment. It has to be for this to work, and a lot of it is, again, going back to the sales agent. Most of them are Type A personalities. Most of them have a pretty healthy ego.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you are approachable, and that you as the company or whoever's doing the training. They're approachable to answer those questions. As I always say, there's no such thing as a dumb question except for the question asked the third time. Because, the first time I get it, you just may not know. The second time, maybe I didn't clear whatever, but third time there's a communication problem.
Right.
It's no longer the answer that's the problem, it's communicating. So, when you look at that, you have to have that open door mentality to make sure that no one is afraid to come in and ask that question, like, how can we do this? Can I do this? And, it has definitely, it's actually led to a lot of impromptu classes. Sometimes we'll be having lunch, many times, just sitting around in a group of agents, and all of a sudden someone asks a question. The next thing you know, everybody's chiming in, working with one another, being collaborative, and it turns into a class environment like, oh, well, have we tried this? Have you done this? And, I love seeing that because, like you said, it's like they're taking ownership not just of where they work, but also of their careers.
Right. Speaking of communication, I want to move on to that next. Effective communication is critical in our industry. How are you training that to our agents?
Again, we talked a little bit about tonality, pacing, timing, but also it has to do with little things. Earlier last week we were talking about how the proper business protocol for taking requests from clients. Verbally, text, email, but also then communicating back. How is it done? Meaning, if a client gives me something that's not in writing, that's going to be a request, I'm always going to follow up with an email saying, per our conversation, here's this, and going back and forth.
Saves a lot of headaches down the road.
It saves a lot of headaches, but it's clear communication. We also want to be extremely transparent. especially with clients. So we're looking at that. We're telling them, it's not just what you say, but how you say. And we're going into that, why it's important to be able to go into the details at certain times and at other times to leave those details out, whether it's a sales or whether you're just communicating. So the communication is, it varies depending on who you're talking to,
Sure.
but we're trying to explain that it has to be communicated, meaning, number one complaint for commercial real estate. And it's funny, I just did a video short about this because I picked up a client.
Mm-hmm.
And number one complaint for commercial real estate is that agents don't call back.
Yep.
Okay? The scary part is some of these are clients saying this, that agents haven't called them back.
Yeah.
And, that should never be the case. So what we're doing in communication is we're teaching them to be proactive. Okay? We're talking about, what if I'm a seller and you're representing me, what would I want to see from you? Mm-hmm. So we talk to them about, every week to 2 weeks, you should be putting together what you've done for that listing, all the marketing that's gone out, all the analytics on the marketing, how many people you've called, how many people you've talked to, any confidentiality agreements or non-circumvention agreements sent for that property, any offering memorandums, any requests for tours. And then also, more importantly, the feedback.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think that's where a lot of it, the people that are really good at reporting, a lot of times they don't report the feedback of what's happening. But, ultimately, if I'm an owner of a property, I need to know what other people are saying and thinking, so that maybe I was unrealistic in my expectations, and I need to lower pricing, or I need to open the doors to get a different type of tenant in, whatever it may be. I can't make those decisions if I don't have the feedback. So we're really trying to give the agents the power by showing them that it's not just communicating about what you've done, but also what you've heard, what's going on, and what's happening.
How are you training verbal communication then?
Verbal communication, role playing.
Okay.
We do a lot of role playing.
Oh, that's
So, we do a lot of role playing with the verbal communication. We'll sit down and we talk about, and we will do everything from, when I'm role playing, I will try. I'm not the best actor in the world, otherwise I wouldn't be in commercial real estate.
Yeah.
Or I guess, well, actually, the true reason is I guess I've been told I have a face for radio.
Yeah. Well,
So, but I try and do. We all try and act a little bit. Meaning,
Sure.
if I'm going to come in as, if we're doing role playing on cold calling, and I'm going to be, I can't be soft and giving. I have to be able to push back. I have to, because that's not
Sure.
what reality is. Not you're going to make a call and everyone's going to say yes. Yeah. If it was, there'd be a lot more people in this business. And but reality is that you're going to make that call and you're going to have to react to what they say and how they say it. And and you can all hear. I mean, everyone has had a conversation with a significant other. And, I'm sure you've heard the words, how are you? Fine. Okay. Are they really fine? No. It's understanding that tone, that tonality, the quickness of the return and all that. So we're actually playing with that as well. We're not just giving them scripts saying, here, work this and make it personal to yourself. Because if that's the case, then they're not really learning how to manage that script, how to manage the pacing of what they're saying, when to pull back, when to push forward.
How about nonverbal? How are you training that? That has to be fun.
Again, nonverbal is a combination of both video cues, pictures. I love starting off nonverbal communication just showing pictures, saying, I have a picture of a group of powerful men in the room. Tell me who's the one in charge.
Yeah.
Tell me who's second in charge, that kind of stuff. Looking at that, seeing if
Body
they can pick
language.
up the cues from just the body language of a photo.
Yeah.
Okay, not just going into the video, which is a lot more difficult.
Yep.
But then we start playing with, little things. But more importantly, sales is human nature.
Mm-hmm.
We are selling something our entire lives. People that say that they're not salespeople have sold.
Right.
You know, they may be selling themselves for a date. They may be selling their car, whatever. They've sold. They know how to go about sales. So ultimately what we do is we take that experience and try and translate it over into their everyday life.
Right.
Meaning, you know when your significant other said, "I'm fine," she's not really fine. You know that when someone's sitting there like this, that they're closed off and not going to talk to you. So we want to now apply that to business. Okay, in the setting, what are you going to do? How are you going to go about that? We then start talking about presentation skills. We start honing that down as well. Meaning, there are little things that you do that can give the wrong impression to a potential client. So you have to mitigate that. So we start talking about little things about hand movements. Everything from keep your hand movements to within your shoulder length, so that so that the person doesn't feel that you're just wild and over the top. From there to all the little aspects, crossing the legs, crossing the feet, whatever it may be, all the main key cues, because that, if anything, tells you more about how the presentation or the pitch is going than what they're saying.
Right. Written communication. That's got to be a fun one. Can you dive into that, please?
Written communication is different for real estate agents. Okay. Number one, professional. The hardest thing right now to train is I have a lot of younger people who are used to texting.
Yeah.
So they take shortcuts and shorthand, and they're not really conveying the message, and it's wasting the time for everybody because they say something, they think they've said it, but the bottom line is people aren't mind readers. If you're not explaining what you're trying to say, they're not going to understand what you're saying. So it then comes back with multiple emails back and forth, and you've just wasted 2-3 hours of time that could have been done if you had succinctly written down what you were looking for.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, we're trying to explain, number one, just general business writing. Be professional. We are professionals. We're going to write professionally. We're going to write in complete sentences. We're going to write in complete paragraphs.
Yeah.
We're also going to understand that when we're writing things, that the written word carries a little bit more power. Okay? And we want to make sure that what we say is accurate. Meaning that there are times, I believe is a very powerful thing to put in, because the bottom line is I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know for sure what the value of a property is.
Right.
But I believe it's this value. I'm pretty good and pretty accurate about my belief being very close to actual. But I'm never going to say I know that property's at the price. So you're using the right words to be able to convey it, but it's also setting those expectations.
So are you giving them examples? How are you training them on that?
Training is a combination of examples, going over specifically what not to say, and also going in specifically what to put in, depending on who you're speaking to, who you're sending it to, how it's going about. In addition to that, going back to the open door policy, if any agent, and this happens probably, I would say 3-4 times a week, if they want us to review something that they want to send out because it's a little bit more complex, or it may be a legal issue or something like that, we're there.
Yeah.
We're going to sit there and say, okay, here. But more importantly, it's how we respond to it. Meaning, I do not say, no, you can't say that, you need to say this. What I'll do instead is I'll take it, I'll translate it into a Word document or something, and I'll put it in, give them a red line so they can see the actual changes and why those changes were made. I'll actually make comments on it, so this way they're learning, not just like, well, I did this because I did this.
Sure.
But explaining why I did it. And I think that's key to it, because if they don't understand why you made those changes, the next time they're just not going to make those changes.
Right. I agree. You've got a room full of A-type personalities. Active listening, training that has got to be difficult. What are the steps you're taking to teach them?
Take a breath.
Yeah. Yeah.
Slow down.
Yeah.
That's
a big one, right? The slowing down.
Huge. It's huge, especially with the A-type personalities of salespeople. It's go, 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 go. A lot of times they got their foot on the gas and they just keep going. And there, again, a lot of what I teach and train, I use analogies a lot in my training, but it goes back to the old saying of, you don't see the forest because of the trees, because you're just going so fast and you're focused on one little thing, you're not seeing the whole picture. The problem with commercial real estate is it doesn't move at a lightning pace.
Right.
As I explain it and setting expectations with our clients, when we onboard a new client and I'm talking to them, we start sitting down. If it's a lease, we're letting them know that in a perfect world, it's going to take probably a month. And that's assuming we find a place tomorrow or the first week.
Sure.
And that's a perfect world. Everything aligns. You get the right offer in. That's not too bad. You go back and forth. You get the lease out. The lease isn't too structured, so you don't have that many comments going back and forth. But it still takes almost a month. So the agents have to understand that speeding up and trying to speed the process up can actually hinder the process. Because if they're going too fast and they're missing items, the attorneys are going to catch that and it's going to come back and they're going to have to redo things. So instead, take the extra 10 minutes, get it right the first time, and then you get it out.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to negotiation skills. How are you training that? This would be very detailed, I'm sure. There has to be a few classes, right?
It's it's very detailed, and it does take different classes because there's different ways to negotiate and different strategies or tactics that you can utilize to negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, it boils down to one thing and one thing only: market knowledge.
Yeah.
You cannot effectively negotiate against somebody without having the market knowledge.
Right.
If you bring facts to the table, they're a lot harder to negotiate again. We're also teaching certain language and certain things, meaning it's not the buyer wants.
Mm-hmm.
If you're representing a buyer and they're saying this is what it is, we're saying the buyer needs this. It's using the right language to set that expectation with the other side, even if it's subconscious. So it's using certain words, power words, but also pulling back at the same time. So it's a matter of understanding the whole picture and where they are. More importantly, the market knowledge is potentially going to give you leverage back in your side. So everything that we're doing when it comes to negotiation and what we're talking about is creating that leverage for the owner. Okay, even something as simple as one of the strategies that we utilize, which surprisingly, and I never understood this, it's against most of the people what they do in the industry, and that's when they have a listing, they, typically speaking, the first week you have the most interest in a listing. You may have a few tours that week. A lot of agents will schedule the tours one after another, after another, after another.
Yeah.
For negotiating purposes, I'm scheduling all the tours on top of each other because I'm trying to create demand from my client, my seller. And so by doing that, a buyer sees another buyer. Human nature. People want something that other people want. Yeah. So it reinforces that purchase decision. It also helps us negotiate deals at a higher price, meaning I may have multiple offers. One offer may be half the list price, but obviously I can't disclose that, nor will I. But I can tell the other person that we have another offer in. If you want this property, give us your best offer. Yeah. And it helps us get up there. And the only way to do that is by creating that demand and trading it. So it's different strategies that we're using to get the leverage to be able to negotiate better on behalf of our clients.